I wish everyone a wonderful day. I was born and raised in Maryland, a state known for its tranquility, tree-lined streets, and long rows of homes. My name is Olivia, and I was born and raised in Maryland. My parents and I spent the majority of our childhood there. That is where I spent my childhood. My mother was a sweet and gentle woman who always smiled at me, from the moment she began preparing breakfast until she went to bed in the cramped kitchen. My father, a man of few words but enormous responsibility, tirelessly worked to meet the family's needs, a man she adored. All of the family members lived in a modest and unremarkable home, but it was filled with love and affection. To the best of my memory, everything was perfect, or so I imagined. However, my entire world crumbled around the age of 15. My mother became ill for a short time and died unexpectedly. I was unaware of the circumstances surrounding her sudden death. I watched as my father became increasingly lonely in a home that was once full of laughter, and the sense of emptiness grew stronger. Although only 2 people were present at each meal, the distance between my father and me appeared to be greater than the available space in the house. I was surprised when my father remarried when I was 18, despite the fact that I knew he deserved to be content again. I was surprised because I knew he deserved happiness. My stepmother, a soft-spoken and gentle woman, brought John into our lives after we had recently married. John was 1 year younger than I was. This is John introducing himself to me. Even though he had never done anything to cause me discomfort, I felt as though my entire life had completely changed, and I was constantly striving to blend in with my new younger brother. Despite the fact that he had never caused me any discomfort, this impression persisted. Simultaneously with my adjustment to my new surroundings, he seemed to be going through the same process. He did not say much. Every evening, the entire family gathered in the living room, with the father and stepmother sitting below and discussing their jobs or future plans. The discussion would intensify as the evening progressed. As John and I exchanged a look of bewilderment, I immediately lowered my head, appearing even more perplexed than before. In an odd way, John would frequently pick up food for me, despite the fact that the meals we shared as a family were consistent and eventually evolved into an opportunity for us to get to know each other better. This occurred despite the fact that we regularly visited the same restaurant every day. Even though he was always quiet and didn't say much, he would occasionally give me longer looks than he usually did. This occurred despite his usual quiet demeanor. While I was deciding whether I was being overly sensitive, I also wondered if this was simply the feelings of a younger brother for his new older sister. On the other hand, there was undeniable tension between us over time. This tension was worsening. The tension arose due to our inability to discuss feelings that were appropriate for sisterly relationships. To what extent has distinguishing the two become harder? Throughout the day, I noticed that when John was present, my heartbeat quickened, and I despised the sensation. This sensation was a result of my discomfort. What bothered me the most was that over the course of our relationship, I began to think of him as more than just a brother. John sneaked into my room as usual. We would have a brief conversation before he returned to his room, but this time he sat longer than usual, his eyes looking at me deeply as if he wanted to say something. I didn't know how to react. I just felt the atmosphere between us become strangely stifling. The silence dragged on. I felt confused, and before I could think further, I nodded slightly, stifling myself. The silence dragged on. I felt confused, and before I could think further, I nodded slightly, inviting him to stay a little longer. We sat there waiting for him to stay a little longer. We sat there in the darkness, in the dim light, with 2 strangers who were close in a way that no one could explain. To be honest, I liked John quite a bit. Brother was very handsome in a way that I couldn't help but notice. Sometimes I wondered if I should feel guilty about it since John was my brother in name after all, but those thoughts were often fleetingly ignored by more logical reasons like the closeness of living in the same house or the harmony of 2 young people living in a closed space. We slept in separate but close-by rooms, both on the 2nd floor, while my father and stepmother slept on the 1st floor. This sometimes created awkward situations. We were both attempting to readjust to the new rhythm of human existence. I was a freshman in college at the time while he was a senior in high school. We were both adjusting to the new rhythm of human existence. On the other hand, There were times after school when we sat on the sofa in the living room with the television's lights shining dimly, but neither of us spoke or exchanged words. I realized I had a genuine affection for John that went beyond family love, but I couldn't deny that my heart raced whenever I saw him. I realized this while navigating my relationship with John. Despite my efforts to ignore it, I couldn't help but notice something strange about his eyes. Perhaps I had a sneaking suspicion that it wouldn't end there, despite the fact that it was a quiet evening like any other. My parents were away on a 5-day vacation, leaving John and me alone at home to enjoy our time off. We initially only considered the chance to unwind without an adult. That evening, we gathered in the living room to watch a romantic film together. I had some dried squid fruit and a few cans of beer on hand to help me unwind after a long week. We weren't particularly interested in watching the movie. It was my hope that I'd be able to take some time off to watch the movie. During the first few minutes of the film, the audience engaged in idle conversation and light-hearted laughter. The beginning of the film was fairly monotonous. However, the scene quickly changed to show a couple passionately embracing each other. The comfort of two siblings sharing a simple moment became stuffy, and neither of them laughed or conversed freely. Neither of us knew what had caused us to become silent. There was no more laughter or straightforward conversation. As I held the beer can, I tried to stay calm, but I was nervous. Despite this, John had already embraced me before I realized what was happening. His gaze had shifted away from me, which was unusual for him, and a warm sensation began to spread throughout my entire body. This was a departure from their usual behavior. His actions were not only forceful and unexpected, but they were also unstoppable. At that moment, in the darkness and silence of the room, we had crossed the boundary of sisterly affection. We did so right at that moment. It was no longer a typical evening. Rather, it was a transformative moment that I knew would forever change the course of events. I was aware that things would never be the same again. His kisses were so intense that it appeared as if all of his long-repressed emotions had suddenly erupted. My body seemed to react differently, despite the fact that my heart was constantly in turmoil. I simply couldn't say no. Throughout the night John and I were together, I was unable to deny that I let my emotions dictate my actions, resulting in something that should not have happened. I let my emotions dictate my actions, which led to an unwarranted outcome. Everything went awry that night. As soft sunlight filtered through the curtains the next morning, I lay beside John in what should have been my own private and tranquil sleeping quarters. I remember exactly how I felt at that moment. On the other hand, something within me had undergone a complete transformation, despite the fact that everything around me remained unchanged. The room was quiet, and the light was warm. Despite our infrequent communication, we managed to transcend all boundaries, and everything seemed to organically align with our long-suppressed emotions. We had worked hard to maintain a sense of closeness, but it had vanished, leaving us with feelings over which we had no control. We didn't say much to each other, but we did exchange brief glances while remaining silent. Perhaps we both realized that our lives would change from this point forward. In the days that followed, my father and stepmother continued to travel a long distance, and we made the most of our time together. There was no longer a sense of awkwardness. Instead, a contradictory feeling emerged. Comfortably, we lived as if we were two people in love, free from the prying eyes of others. Meals were no longer family meals but private moments. Every night it was just me and John. We sat together, watched movies, talked, and eventually ended the night in the same bed. I let myself forget reality and forgot that John and I were only siblings in name. We lived during that time as if we were a young, free couple without any worries. Everything happened so naturally and easily that we continued to see each other for months and kept our secret relationship hidden. We continued to see each other regularly. The long, sleepless nights became routine when John sneaked into my room, and we clung like there was no barrier. This situation occurred when John sneaked into my room. John would sneak into my room when my parents needed to leave or go to bed early. Throughout the day, we tried to maintain our normal demeanor and continued to feast together as a family. John and I only made eye contact, and my parents were fine with it. During our time together, we pretended that nothing had happened, as if every private moment had been a dream. This was true for the entire time we spent together under one roof. The hidden tension was draining me, and the guilt was steadily engulfing me. This was why I couldn't stop the guilt from overwhelming me. I decided to take charge of this relationship rather than end it, despite my fear of the possible outcomes. My goal was to convince myself that nothing had changed about the situation. I continued to live in complete secrecy every night, and I eventually grew so used to spending time with John that I feared I would be unable to leave him. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to escape him. When I realized I couldn't let this situation continue, I began taking birth control pills in secret, making sure no one knew. Approximately 1 year later, John received his diploma and enrolled in college. Within reach, we were never going to be discovered. To continue his education, he had to relocate to another city and leave his home. Despite my reluctance to admit it, I knew our relationship would change after John left. The physical distance between us made the situation more complicated. There would be no more sneaky nights and no more secrets. Quiet moments together. The distance forced us to put that relationship on hold even though I still felt heavy with nostalgia for the past after graduating. I decided to find a new path for myself. I applied for a job as an office worker for a digital company. The job wasn't anything special, but it gave me stability away from the days of conflict and emotional turmoil. That's when I met him. The man who changed my life forever. He is the owner of a fairly large hair salon in the city, calm, confident, and charming from the first meeting. I was impressed by his strength and gentleness. He was unlike anyone I had ever met before. Every look he gave me made me feel safe, something I had never felt in all these years. We fell in love quickly. Everything happened naturally, as if we were destined to find each other. Not long after we got married, we started to build the family life I had always dreamed of. Now we have a child together and life is more complete than ever. The days with him and the child make me temporarily forget the painful memories of the past. Although sometimes they still come back to haunt me in moments of weakness, even though my husband was a wonderful man who always showed me genuine care and love, a deep part of me still harbored guilt towards him. Every time I looked into his eyes, I felt a weight on my heart, as if I were concealing a part of my past that he should have known. I knew I'd found a new home, a man worthy of love and respect, but the memory of John and those secret days lingered in my mind. I wondered if I'd ever truly forget everything. I had a family to protect, which is most important. Sometimes the thought keeps me awake at night, torn between telling everyone everything and keeping this a secret forever. I am afraid that if I confess, he will never look at me the same way again. Everything we've built, including the little family I cherish, could crumble as a result of a confession. On the other hand, keeping this secret is like carrying a heavy burden with me every day. I'm not sure if I should tell him about my past with John. Sometimes the thought keeps me awake at night. For the first time in my life, I find myself at a pivotal point, uncertain about which direction to take. If you were me, would you speak up and risk everything or stay silent and hope the past won't hurt the people you care about? I'd like to know your response. My only question is, if you were in my situation, would you speak up and risk everything or stay silent and let the past haunt you? I am truly at a crossroads and unsure of which path to take, and I would appreciate any advice, sympathy, or criticism you could offer. I greatly appreciate all these suggestions.